Morning. So when I did my last video, I shared about the 7 hints that I use, and those there might be a few more, but what I did is I actually went into one of my surnames, and as I said, I'm going to be sharing my surnames in these storylines, and I didn't really complete my experiment or to see just how much, but um the the information that have received from adding this to everything that I've been doing in ancestry for all these years, as far as the dates and everything I could get my hands on. um but there was just some other things that started showing up when I got back. Now, for the ones of you that may be new, um, you might want to go back. I did about 22 episodes of doing this without necessarily, I wasn't really ready to, share it because I was still kind of learning from it. And so today I thought I'm gonna just do a quick little video and just share some of the information that I kind of gleaned from all of the available, and Ancestry is always adding more and more also, so there is more to be looking through from probably the last time I worked on the surname. So I didn't, so basically I had kind of completed my research on this family. It was the Rain family, and it was spelled Raine, and there's a lot of variations in that spelling, and there's a lot of that type of stuff also that goes into figuring out who these people were and how did they fit into society. And so I'm gonna read. They're mowing the lawn outside by my window. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to review the 7 hints that I gave yesterday, and then we can kind of match them up with some of the things that I found. And I'm in the process of learning more about how to share my screens, and so that you could actually see. I use an Excel sheet right now, and that may change because I found that a lot of the information I didn't really need to put on the Excel sheets because I always already know. I'm gonna check everything there is about the birth and where they were born, and I'm gonna check about, um, did they have kids, who the married, a lot of that information. So that doesn't really change or have to, I like to, before I actually let, you know, people who are working on the Rain family right now, it's not that I'm saying I'm done with this, but I just wanted to pass on some of these tidbits of information that came up. And this was between like yesterday afternoon and then a few hours this morning working on it. And of course, it's one of those things that the more you work on it, the faster you get. And I don't know. There's just some interesting things that I saw immediately, and I have them up on a Excel sheet, and I'm trying to figure out a way to either turn them into a digital asset for you out of my, then I could make it available to everybody. But right now, I'm still kind of learning, and it may be, in fact, when I first did the 7, I think it was 10, and so I kind of pulled it together as far as the ones that really kind of, to me, brings that more um, feeling of an understanding of who these people were and who they married, and then how long did they live and how old were they, and were they in the military, and so let me just review the hints. um, Number 1 was list occupations and review the dangers of doing their job. And this was something that came really and hit me really hard. Um, was what they were doing, the occupations, and how it related into the rest of their story. Research what is going on in their area. Why did they move? Where did they move to? Now, these people that I've been working on basically were in Kentucky, and from Kentucky they moved to Missouri, and from Missouri they moved to Montana. And so that's kind of a more of a common flow, although I think that there's still people making some of those moves that are not necessarily make as much sense. Now, one of the people I was working on today, and I was reading his um, actually his uh, will, and and I also excuse me, I'd also realized that he number one, he was in the Civil War, and number two, um, there was some pension that I think his wife actually received the pension after he had passed. And but when I was reading the will and really looking at every single word and where it came up that, and again, you'll get used to me, the ones of you and the ones that have been watching me for a while, that I find something and then I want to go a little bit deeper. So I know that during some of the wars, land was given to these people who volunteered and who served in the military, and he had a lot of land, and so when the Civil War was done and the rest of his life, he went back to farming and stayed there. Now it was his kids that kind of got an idea to go on, but at the same time, in his will, he was leaving large sums of land for his kids, which would also kind of give them a one up for from somebody going into the Wild Willie West and trying to homestead. And the records did show that he steaded the land, and that's coming back. I mean, there's a lot of people in various places, especially isolated places, that are doing homesteading, and the government rules about it, and what you have to accomplish within a certain period of time, or you lose the property. So that's another area of my research that I probably want to know, because um, I watch a lot of the van people right now, and that's a big deal to go, go to Alaska, go to up in the mountains in Montana, or go someplace kind of isolated, and you know, and then I've watched women do it also, where there's got to be a certain number of animals and a certain size of a garden, and there's requirements to it, but it's free land, and that land's very, very valuable now, as and he passed it on to he was very meticulous about how he did his last will, and leaving certain things to certain parts of the family, and 15 acres here and 10 acres there, and um so it's kind of interesting that to see how these people then were affected by his passing and what they did. And I think that the ones that sometimes leave are probably the ones that, well, maybe they're not into being farmers, but they're actually, um, maybe they weren't even in the will. I haven't checked closely. It was interesting to me because, why I'm at this part in my research. Um, my grandfather was an Allnut out of Montana, and he was the youngest of 11 kids. And so I'm not even completely done with the Allnuts in some ways, because, with that many kids and following them, but when you start following them and putting them together, to me, it's very fascinating, and it is a way that I can share a story based on those extra facts that I'm documenting. um, Track the age of death of each person in the family and all children's deaths. A lot of children's deaths that are really noticeable, and probably takes effects and affects the family. When possible, use the diagnosis from the death certificate. So I I was amazed in that short period of time how many I found, and I think that there's probably some programming going on in ancestors that's matching those and giving them to us, and there's a wealth of information usually on them. Their mental status. Now, I haven't found anybody yet so far in this line of the family, but in the Olnets, there was a number of either the children or the children's children who had been institutionalized for many, 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 many years, and and part of that again is the history of who ended up in mental hospitals and why. And back then it was much different than now, where they have more medication and more ideas about, uh, even menopause. A lot of times when women started acting out, they'd be sent to a mental institution, and because they couldn't figure out what to do. Cemeteries and newspapers are always valuable, and um, I and I'll share it when I start sharing some of the information of what I was working on in the last, well, half a day probably. But so I put them, and so the father's surname, um, that I started out with is Joseph Sheldon Rain Jr., and he also had 11 children. So it's going to take me a while to fine tooth comb all of both of these families. And there was times when these families got together, which has been, it's not totally, I wouldn't say it was a brick wall for me, but untangling it is going to be interesting to try to figure out. Oh, excuse me again. Um, how many people left Kentucky and went to Missouri and lived with a family named Rhodes. And it's got to be like a maiden name or something along those lines for them to actually live there. Until then, they left and went to Montana. And sometimes those mysteries, when I wasn't doing videos like this, I would get to a point, and my brother and I always laugh about it. I'd get to a point and I'd kind of be stuck. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to work on something that I'm going to get somewhere on. And now I feel more that I want to be able to finish every single person as far as I can take it. And actually, some of this went really far today. The lady I think had died in 1965, and that was the year I graduated from high school. So um, that was kind of interesting to me to see that also. So anyway, so I'm just gonna, and I have it up on my screen, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to decide, and I think part of it is like going back in time and wanting a big whiteboard that you could see behind me with all the information so you could follow along. I just haven't got techy enough yet to figure out. I know I should be able to share that information and you could still see me because I watch other people do it. But I'm almost 76 years old and I'm learning something new every day. And sometimes I want a little break from that. And so I haven't did it, but I'm sure when I do it, I can watch a YouTube video or one or two or three and figure out how to do it. I set up this whole system kind of by myself. I actually had, when I first retired, I built a website and I sell my jewelry out of it. And so that was a lot of um, patient training myself. And I've been a trainer before. And so it's kind of easier for me probably to train myself because I know, kind of what works. And I know how I learned. And a lot of times when I was training adults, I didn't know for sure, because people learn things differently. Some people want to be spoke to, some people want it in writing, some people um, it takes longer to grasp it than others. And so, when you have a full classroom type scenario and you're teaching these, it's like you have to be careful of who your audience is. And with the YouTubes, and the videos I'm making, I don't know. I know that there are people out there that are liking them and reading through to the end. And so I think that that's um, you know, somewhat where I know. Anyway, so on this, I'm just going to give you some data. So it was like I found let's see how many did I find? 3 farmers were definitely mentioned, and they were in the older bracket. And then when well, that one was in the Civil War, and then I ran into a young woman. she was in the Air Force and she actually died of congestive heart failure at 68. And the farmers that I'm mentioning were, let's see, 72, 80, 84, 68, 69, and then the last one I just worked on a little bit ago was a 41-year-old person with a heart attack. So I have it from, going down, and so, and I had noticed that there's many of the stories that I was telling before, and, please go back in and view them. I think there's 22 of them, because some of them are very good stories, and it uses a lot of this technique as far as being able to put information together. Um, and I don't know if anybody's going to recognize this, but I did this morning. So I was reading my list that I gave yesterday, and it said, want to learn how to be a better storyteller? Bring life to your ancestors, and laugh because I'm bringing death also into them, but it's interesting to know the farmers seem to live a lot longer, and then the ones that were dying, you know, uh, 20 years short of what the farmers were, um, also had military stress. And there was one guy that he had actually signed up for World War One. He was drafted, and then he signed up for World War Two. And when you just think about it, I don't know how much stress is in your life. Uh, I try to keep mine, kind of like locked aside. But part of my big stress has been just being isolated, because of the pandemic. But when I look at their records, so the other thing I was looking at was there was let's see, the 72-year-old died of cancer of the thyroid gland, and then the 80-year-old died of cardiorenal disease. And so that has to do with the heart and the kidneys, and they both kind of fail at the same time. But he was 80 years old. And there are a certain number of people that are not going to die from some of these diseases when they're young. It's just that our bodies kind of wear out. And so I'm not necessarily as current about the interested as about the DNA aspect of it when I see somebody live that long. And but it's still nice to know, because then the next one, 84 years old, was heart disease. So now we got two heart disease. And for some reason, I haven't figured it out yet, James Washington, and he was a farmer, but something happened to his leg, and then gangrene set in, and they had to amputate his right leg. So this could very well be more of a stressor for a farmer. Um, you don't see a whole as many accidents out when you're on the farm as you do in an industrial mill or some of the other places where people have worked. And then there was the 68-year-old, and that's the woman that was in the Air Force. And 68 is kind of young to have, total heart failure is what she had. But it was also underneath some of the other diagnosis was suspected of thyroid cancer. So, I'm not, you know, selling everybody on the statistical information other than generalizing and watching. And when you start doing this, you'll see these patterns. And then there was a 69-year-old, I haven't found um, she wasn't in the military and she was a wife. And I don't know what her diagnosis was, when she died. And then there was this young man, died at 41, and his was a heart attack. So then when you see enough heart attacks going through, you might have a little bit idea about it. I also had a lady contact me not very long ago, and she was, there's a whole other story, and I'm not sure if I've already told her story or not, but I will eventually. Um, but she was not known by this family because there was like her mother had this affair and she was born. But anyway, it had to do with this really unusual, strange heart thing. And she called me and she said, I thought you might want to know and pass this on to the family members because it was a DNA connection to it. So there is that going on. So there is, you know, that's like one, two, three, four, four people out of this few that I've been able to work on had heart problems. So, you may want to look at it and you may want not to look at it, but it's just information, that makes it a little bit more, because these younger people have seen these older people live a lot longer and they're not living that long. Anyway, so that's my story for the day, and I will um, continue on whenever I have the next one. And I really appreciate you all reading my videos and spending the time and actually liking them and or subscribing or whatever you feel comfortable. But I do get reports back, and what I see is people are enjoying what I'm doing. So thank you very much. Bye bye.